want to start by telling a little story. It was a little over a year ago. I've been working with Poor People's Campaign for a long time. And it was a little over a year ago that I got a call from Reverend Barber. And he said, we want to come to Washington. And he said, we want to bring the Poor People's Campaign to Washington. Some of you are nodding because some of you came. And we want to talk to Congress. We want to witness to Congress. We want to tell Congress what it's like to be poor. And we want to tell Congress what they can do about poverty. And so I said, what can I do to help? And he said, call a hearing. I said, you bet. So I called Elijah Cummings from over in the House. Many of you know Congressman Cummings, good man. And the two of us put on a hearing, and we invited everybody in Congress, every senator, every congressperson. Now, some of you will be surprised to hear only Democrats came. But they came. Folks came to listen. But here was the key part, the people who came to testify, the people who came to witness. And they told their stories, one after another, about what it means to be poor, about what it means in terms of your life, your children's lives, your dignity, your opportunity, how you see the world. And it could have been a sad hearing, could have been a depressing hearing, but it wasn't. And I'll tell you why. It's because of the people who said, and I remember the woman who said it first, she told a story of real heartbreak, and then she said, and here's how I see it, here's why I'm in this fight. Don't waste my pain. Yeah. And here she is in the front row. Don't waste my pain. And that's how I see this moment in Washington, this moment in our country. We have a fundamental issue, and that is, who is our government going to work for? Is it going to just keep working for the rich and the powerful, keep working for a thinner and thinner slice at the top? Or are we going to have a government that works for everyone else? Well, I want a government that works for everyone else, and that's what this fight is all about. So I'm in this one all the way. You know, right now, the rich and the powerful, man, they want to see tax breaks in Washington. They get them in a matter of weeks. They want a hearing on their issues. They get them in a matter of weeks. But for us, it's not going to happen that way. It's not going to happen because we don't own the lobbyists and the lawyers to make it all happen. It's got to happen starting at the grassroots. It's got to happen with people who make their voices heard. It's got to happen with people who start with the fundamental idea that I know what this feels like. I know the change we need to make in this country. Don't waste my pain. We're going to build a better America, and we're going to do it together. So that's why I'm here today.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Here is the chair is yours. Bishop Barber, you want to start?
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Thank you.
So we've got this reality. First of all, getting the numbers right. You know, for years we heard 37 million people in poverty, so on and so. The reality is 140 million people, 43.5% of this country. The reality is 26 million black people, but that represents almost 60% of black people in concentrated poverty. But then there's 66 million white people, poor and low wealth. So in terms of raw numbers, it's more white. We've got systemic racism and just in voter suppression. I won't go through the other ones. It's in voter suppression that we haven't seen since the days of Jim Crow. 26 states before this current president, 26 states since 2010 passed racist voter suppression laws. 4 million people that get up every morning, can buy unleaded gas, can't buy unleaded water. A military-industrial complex that has just gone berserk, and that Eisenhower, Republican, warned us about. King warned us about, where we're spending now 53+ cents of every discretionary dollar on military, mostly contracts for war, and less than 16 cents of every dollar on healthcare infrastructure. Then we got this false moral religious narrative that somehow says if you're, you know, if you're for tax cuts and for guns and for against women's rights and against gay people and against immigrants, that somehow that's the moral, godly thing to do. This is forum is right. We're in this forum. But in 2016, there were 26 presidential debates. 140 million people in poverty, not one debate on poverty and to interlocking injustices connected. Not one full debate on voter suppression and racist gerrymandering. Will you push and use the power of your campaign to push and ensure that of the televised debates, there will be a debate that focuses on systemic racism, how that's connected to systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, the false moral narrative, religious nationalism? How will you do that? And do you even believe that it is necessary for us to have that conversation in front of all of America, not just some of America, as you see here today?
Yes, I do. I think that is the conversation we need to have with all of America. And there's so many ways that this is intertwined. Can I just start with one piece of this? And it's where you went, Reverend Barber, and that is where we spend our money. You know, you start to talk about budgets, and there are a lot of people who just kind of glaze over. And they say, oh, that's math. I don't have to do that. That's just numbers. You know, we'll let the experts work on that. We don't really have to worry about that. The truth is, no. Tell me how you spend your money, and I'll tell you what your values are. Because that's where it shows up. And that's why one of the keystones, central parts of what I talk about now in my campaign is that we start in America with a wealth tax. We need to put a tax on the top 0.1%, the biggest fortunes in this country. And here's the idea behind it. It's a 2-cent tax. It says once you've got $50 million, your first $50 million, fine. But I know you've relaxed over that now, right? But when you hit that 50 millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents. And 2 cents for every dollar after that. It's a tax on wealth. It's a tax on the great fortunes in this country. And understand this, it's not a tax to say there's something bad or you've done something bad. It's to say, you built a great fortune in this country, you had some great idea, you worked really hard, or you inherited well, whichever way. But the point is, if that fortune was built here in America, I guarantee it was built at least in part using workers all of us help pay to educate. It was built at least in part getting your goods to market on roads and bridges all of us help pay to build. It was protected by firefighters all of us help pay the salaries for. So we're just saying, you make it really big in this country, pitch in 2 cents so everybody else has a chance to make it in this country. And here's what that does. 2 cents from the top 0.1%. And here's what we can do with it. We can start out by providing universal child care for every baby in this country aged 0 to 5. We can provide universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country. We can raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher to the professional levels that they deserve and that we want our children to be taken care of people who have real professions here. We can make public technical school, 2-year college, and 4-year college tuition free for every one of our kids. We can put $50 billion into historically black colleges and universities so that they can play from a level playing field in building tomorrow's leaders. And we can cancel student loan debt for 95% of the people who have student loan debt. We can do all of that, and we can hit the opioid crisis head on. We can put $100 billion over the next 10 years to putting the resources right down into the communities that are on the front lines in this fight. We can actually save lives, save families, save communities across this country, and we would still have money left over. What I want you to understand about every part of this, and I know you understand this, is asking those at the very top to put in 2 cents is enough to be able to help all of our children build a future. Not just some of our
Senator,
children, but all of our children.
Let me follow up on that question, though, because I really want to get at it. One of the things this campaign is saying, though, that if we don't say the word poverty, and if we do not have a debate that focuses on poverty and systemic racism and ecological devastation as combined, not as silo issues. And one of the things we've been really asking the candidates is, do you believe we need to have that debate? Because in 26 last time we didn't.
Yes.
We didn't have, and we will push and go to the media and those setting up the next 26 or 30 debates and say, listen, there's no way in the world we can have this happen again. 50-some years after the voting rights decision, we have less voting rights today than we had 50-some years ago. More poverty, and 43% of this nation in poverty, and we're having a political discourse that won't even say the word poverty in the mainstream, right? And that's what we want. That's the question. Will we push to have that debate publicly with all the media there? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Joy, and Joy has a question.
Oh, I had a quick follow-up because you're in the United States Senate, obviously, and it's an interesting place with an interesting leader.
That's a nice way to put it. Very diplomatic.
Yes, try to be diplomatic. How would you, as president, enact this policy, the idea, which is, it polls very well, the idea of doing a wealth tax, but it would run into two gauntlets. One would be Mitch McConnell, whether he is the majority leader or even as minority leader with the power of the filibuster. And number two, the people who you might not be so popular with, the very wealthy, the Wall Street, the payday lenders, the people who are actually now sort of doing very well policy-wise that would fight this tooth and nail. How would you enact it?
Okay, so let's start at a technical level, because you asked the question that way. Let's be clear. If we're in the majority and Mitch McConnell wants to block us on the kinds of things our country needs and the kinds of things they elected me and other people to enact, then I'm all for getting rid of the filibuster. We cannot let him block things the way he did during the Obama administration. I've been there when it was one set of rules when President Obama was president, and now it's a different set of rules. Now that they've got Trump in the White House, we can't do that as Democrats. We have to be willing to get in this fight. So that's part one. But part two is to understand this is about making democracy work. So the way I see this, when you ask the question, and you rightly say, by the way, that wealth tax, it's not only popular among Democrats, it's not only popular among independents, a majority of Republicans support it. Same thing for getting rid of student loan debt. A majority of Republicans are there. This is something we can build support on all across this country. But what it really means is that we got to be building our grassroots movement now. This is what the Poor People's Campaign is all about. You've been doing this for a long time. But it's build it not just toward November of 2020, which I'm all in favor of, but it's keep that momentum up so that come January of 2021, we are fighting for real change. A president who leads and a people who say this is what we want. That's how we get pressure on Congress and get to make the changes we need to make in this country.
All right, let's bring up Beth Jones. Where is Beth? Beth is in the audience and has a question for the senator. All right.
Hi, Senator. Thank you
Hi,
for
Beth.
coming. I'm standing with Swami Dayananda. She is a Hindu
Swami.
monk from Yogaville Community Serving with Union Hill Baptist Church and Friends of Buckingham for Environmental and Climate Justice in Virginia. I come from Southeast Louisiana, where we have one of the fastest eroding coastlines in the world. And not far inland, in some of the poorest communities, you'll find a long line of petrochemical companies. Families have been flooded with deadly poisons for generations. There's toxins in the air and the water that has caused so much illness that some folks call our corner of the country Cancer Alley. Ecological devastation and the climate crisis is happening all around us. And the poor and marginalized are always the first to be hit. What is your plan to ensure that everyone has a right to clean water, air, land, and to defend our environment?
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Can we start by saying that environmental issues are poor people's issues? Because it's critical to stop and acknowledge that. You know, I've been working on different parts of environmental plans, and the very first one I did was about what a president can do, and I love saying this, what a president can do all by herself. The kinds of things that don't have to go through Congress. So for example, the first day that I'm sworn in, I will put in place a moratorium that on all of our federal lands, on all of our national parks, there'll be no new drilling, no new mining for petrochemicals, and offshore, no more. We're not going to do that. When I rolled that out, the very first place I went was to coastal South Carolina, where poor people, where working people, where people in struggling communities are on the front lines trying to stop offshore drilling. They make their lives and their livelihoods from that water. And they say just, all it's going to take is one spill, one accident, one mistake, and it'll wipe them out for generations to come. That indeed, the very fact of doing it, the waste produced by this and the changes, they don't want to see it. And the hardest part is their voice doesn't get heard. Not in a world that is full of, let's listen to the lobbyists. Let's listen to the people who can make the big campaign contributions. Let's listen to the folks who can hire bought and paid for experts. You know, when you've got a government that works for a thin slice at the top, a government that works for those who can show up with plenty of money and doesn't work for anyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple, and we need to call it out for what it is. So I'll tell you this, I'll make this promise, and that is, I am in this fight so that this government doesn't just work for those at the top. Here's the good news, I've got the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. Here's the bad news, we need the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate, but no one needs it more than the poor, than the people whose voices don't get heard, than the people whose communities get destroyed. No one needs it more than the people whose livelihood is taken away, whose clean air is taken away, whose water is destroyed and undrinkable. And that's the fight we have to be in. We have to be in that fight morally, we have to be in that fight economically, and we have to be in that fight politically every single day. Count me in on that one.
Reverend Theo Harris.
So in 1968, when the Poor People's Campaign was launched by Dr. King and other leaders, they were talking about the tripartite evils, the connection between systemic racism and poverty and militarism, and how every bomb dropped in Vietnam, and now we have a lot more wars, was a bomb in unservices to the poor of this country. We spend 53 cents of every discretionary dollar on the military and 15 cents on education, healthcare, and anti-poverty programs. So what are you going to do to end this war economy, to challenge militarism, and to lift the load of poverty?
So we need to cut our military budget. You know, this is, and there are multiple ways we should be thinking about this. We need a military and a Department of Defense that constantly isn't just saying, our plan is more, more, more. How much more can we absorb? How much more can we get? No, we need to think of our budget in terms of our values. One way we can deal with that budget is we need to stop the endless wars. No great nation fights endless wars. We bring our people home, that is billions of dollars that we have to spend here at home on our people, on our future. Every time we make an expenditure, I go back to this question about budgets, every time we decide we're spending money on this instead of that, We're making a very concrete statement about our values. And for me, this is not about how to help a giant industry. This is not about how to make a department bigger and bigger and bigger. This is not about how to support endless wars. This is about how we build an America that is strong, that is vibrant, and that works, not just for those at the top, but works for everyone.
Bishop Barber has another question.
Senator, thank you so much. The states that have the highest lack of low wages, the highest lack of health care, and the most politicians that are voting against health care, both in the Congress and at state houses, the greatest attacks on immigrants, the greatest attacks on the LGBT community, greatest attacks on women, and the biggest cuts to public education have this in common. They are all the states that have had the worst racist voter suppression and racist gerrymandering, and they're in the South. And so what happens is people get elected by racialized voter suppression, racialized gerrymandering in the South, but because they're a third of all the poor people are in the South, over 50 million, 13 million people are uninsured, and because the majority of the people that are poor and low wealth are white, people who get elected by racialized policies then use their power to hurt mostly white people. And there's been this historic division to keep poor African American, poor whites, Latinos, and Natives in the South from coming together, because if you change the South, you fundamentally change the country. And 40% of all African Americans now, 40% of voters are African Americans are in the South. You connect that to progressive whites and Latinos. It's a fundamental change shift. However, what we have seen by a lot of politicians, the Democrats, is an attempt to find a way around the South, to go around the South, to not really campaign in the South, to not build those interracial coalitions in the South, or to kind of pick certain states. I'll pick maybe North Carolina, maybe Florida, but just write off. How is it that your campaign is not going to write off or understand that you can't do that? And how is it that you are working to bring those communities together that have been traditionally divided, as Dr. King said, every time they have the power to bring into being the beloved community? What are you going to do to pull them together?
So, you're right. Dr. King is the one who started this with this notion that the whole idea is to turn working people against working people, black working people against white working people, black poor people against white poor people, because so long as they stay against each other, then no one notices who's picking their pockets and who's getting rich off it. So you asked me how I'm going to make sure we don't write off the South. I've already been down there, and I'm going to keep going everywhere in this country. I've been to 20 states and Puerto Rico already. I've been to Mississippi and Alabama. I've been to Tennessee. I've been to South Carolina, but I've also been to Georgia. I've been there. I'm building grassroots organization on the ground because I believe that's how we build a future. We build it together. And by the way, I just want to say off to the side on this, you know, I've done more than 100 town halls now. I've been there. I've been to a lot of places around this country. I've taken more than 2,000 unfiltered questions from folks. Shoot, I'm over 30,000 selfies now. Yeah, so I'm in this. But here's the deal. Ask yourself why I've got the time to do that and most other candidates don't. And the reason is because I'm not spending my time behind closed doors with a bunch of millionaires. I'm not spending my time behind closed doors with a bunch of corporate lobbyists. I'm spending my time building a grassroots organization that looks like the rest of America and that helps us build together so that we understand this government can't keep working for those at the top and survive. We need to fight back. There's a whole lot more of us than there is of them. We get united, we fight back. That's how we make real change in this country.
How would Elizabeth Warren, as the presidential candidate, be able to overcome the forces of really great wealth who would be arrayed against your candidacy? How would you win? How are you going to win?
Because there's more of us than there is of them. I mean, that's the bottom line that we've got to remember. We get out there and talk about the things that touch people's lives, touch it every day. Look, I go out and talk about corruption in the system. It's not a hard sell. Folks across this country get it. I go out and talk about a 2-cent wealth tax and that we could have universal child care, every one of our babies, that we could build 3.2 million new housing units, housing for the poor, housing for the homeless, housing for the working poor, housing for working people. We could do that in this country. All it takes is us. It takes us believing in ourselves, organizing, reaching out, neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, community to community. That's how we build a future. That's our comparative advantage. At the end of the day, we do that. They can have all the money in the world. It's not going to stop a people's movement.
All right. And we have literally 28 seconds. I don't think there's time to get a question in, so I will just thank you, Senator Elizabeth Warren. I think you're out of time. You have 23 seconds. You can use it. Say what you want to say. You got 22 seconds.
I just want to say I believe. It's a great honor to be here. My daddy ended up as a janitor, and it's because America invested in some opportunities in public schools, in a commuter college that costs $50 a semester. That's how his baby daughter got a chance to be a public school teacher, a college professor, a United States senator, and a candidate for president of the United States.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Elizabeth Warren.